Welcome to A Reason to Talk with Chris Reason. Today, we're talking about the murderer, the serial killer, Ted Bundy, the American serial killer. I don't know why the fuck I said that twice. Before we get into today's episode, here is the Prince of Hardcore, the Dev, with a message.
Hey, my name's the Dev, aka the Prince of Hardcore. If you're not watching the Christopher Reasons podcast, what the fuck are you doing in life? Go watch that shit, like and subscribe on his YouTube channel, and go fuck yourself.
This is A Reason to Talk with Chris Reason. Theodore Robert Bundy was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of young women and girls during the 1970s and possibly earlier after more than a decade of denial. He confessed to 30 murders committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. Bundy's true victim total is unknown. Bundy typically simulated having a physical impairment to convince his target that he was in need of assistance or would dupe her into believing he was an authority figure. He would then lure his victim to a vehicle parked in a more secluded area, at which point he would bludgeon her unconscious, then restrain her with handcuffs before driving his victim to a remote location to be sexually assaulted and killed. He frequently revisited the bodies of those he abducted, grooming and performing sexual acts on the corpses until decomposition and destruction by wild animals made further interactions impossible. He decapitated at least 12 of his victims, keeping their heads as mementos in his apartment. On a few occasions, he broke into homes at night and bludgeoned, maimed, strangled, and/or sexually assaulted his victims in their sleep. In 1975, Bundy was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states, facing murder charges in Colorado. Bundy engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assault in Florida, including 3 murders, being recaptured in 1978 for the Florida homicide to receive 3 death sentences and 2 trials, and was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison in Rayford on January 24, 1989. Biographer and ruler characterized him as a sadistic sociopath who took pleasure from other humans, pain, and the control he had all over his victims to the point of death and even after. Bundy described himself as the most cold-hearted bitch you'll ever meet, a statement with which attorney Polly Nelson, a member of his last defense team, agreed. She wrote as a very definition of heartless evil. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell, November 24th, 1946. Did I say that right? No, okay. To Eleanor Louise Cowell and Elizabeth Lundholm for Onward Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His biological father identity has never been confirmed. His birth certificate assigned paternity to salesman of the United States Air Force veteran named Lloyd Marshall, though a copy of it listed his father as unknown. Louise claimed she met a war veteran named Jack Worthington, who abandoned her soon after she became pregnant, since his records revealed that several men by the name of John Worthington and Lloyd Marshall lived near Louise. When Bundy was conceived, some family members expressed suspicions that Bundy was fired by his own father. That does not make any sense. Whatever. Who in the 2020 documentary film Crazy Not Insane Psychiatrist that Dorothy Lewis claimed she received a sample of Bundy's blood, and the DNA test confirmed that Bundy was not the product of incest. For the first 3 years of his life, Bundy lived in the northeast Philadelphia Roxborough neighborhood, which maternal grandparents Samuel Leto and Eleanor Miriam Longstreet, who raised him as their son to avoid the social stigma that accompanied birth outside of wedlock at the time. Family, friends, and even young Ted were told that his grandparents were his parents, that his mother was his older sister. Bundy eventually discovered the truth about his family, although his recollections of the circumstances vary. He told the girl that shorted him a copy of his birth certificate after calling him a bastard, but he told biographer Stephen Macau and Hugh Ainsworth that he had found the certificate himself. Biographer and true crime writer and Rule, who knew Bundy personally, wrote that he did not find out until 1969 when he located his original birth record in Vermont. Bundy expressed to a lifelong resentment towards his mother for never telling him about his real father and for leaving him to discover the true parentage for himself. Sorry. All right, let's get into his victims. There's going to be a lot of this shit, and there's some confirmed and unconfirmed. But let's start off. The night before his execution, Bundy confessed to 30 homicides, but the true total remains unknown. And Bundy, a sick son of a bitch, occasionally made cryptic comments to encourage speculation. He told Ainsworth in 1980 that for every murder publicized, there could be one that was not. When FBI agents proposed to a total tally of 36, Bundy responded, "Add one digit to that, and you'll have it." Years later, he told Nelson that the common estimate of 35 was accurate, but Capel wrote that Ted and I both knew the total was much higher. In an interview, Capel stated his belief that Bundy had killed at least 50, maybe 75. John Henry Brown, a lawyer for Bundy, who later claimed that the first person he killed was a young boy when they were playing some kind of sex game in the woods, and so he must have been only 12, 13, 14 years old. Brown also said that Ted told me that in the interview that he killed over 100 people. I told Ted Bundy that we now have the evidence to charge him with both cases. Leon County Sheriff Ken Casteras recalled, referring to the Chi Omega murders and the slaying of Leach. He looked at me and said, "When you find the person that committed these crimes that you think I committed, that person is going to be wanted for murders of women in the 3 digits in 6 states." I don't think he even knew how many he killed or why he killed them, said Reverend Fred Lawrence, the Methodist clergyman who administered Bundy's last rites. That was my impression, my strong impression. On the evening before his execution, Bundy reviewed his victim tally with Hagmeyer, on a state-by-state basis for a total of 30 homicides. In Washington, you had 11, including Parks, abducted in Oregon, but killed in Washington, and including 3 unidentified. In Utah, you had 8, 3 unidentified. In Colorado, you had 3, Florida 3, Oregon 2, both unidentified. Idaho 2, 1 was unidentified, and California 1 that was unidentified. In 1974, Washington and Oregon, you got January 4th, Karen Sparks, who was 18, bludgeoned and sexually assaulted in her bed as she slept in the University District, survived, but the extent of her injuries resulted in permanent brain damage. February 1st, Linda Ann Healy, who was 21, bludgeoned while asleep and abducted from her basement bedroom in Seattle, Washington, and was then decapitated and dismembered post-mortem. Mandible recovered at Taylor Mountain site in 1975. March 12th, Donna Gail Manson, 19, abducted while walking to a concert at Evergreen State College. Body left according to Bundy at Taylor Mountain site, but never found. However, there's a speculation that the partial remains of an unidentified female discovered near Eatonville, Washington, on August 29, 1978, could have belonged to Manson. Remains and clothing were reportedly destroyed on May 10, 1985, before a positive forensic identification could be made. April 17th, Susan Elaine Rancourt, who was 18, disappeared after attending an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College. Skull and mandible recovered at Taylor Mountain site in 1975. Both had been severely fractured. May 6th, Roberta Kathleen Parks, who was 22, vanished from Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. Skull and mandible recovered at Taylor Mountain site in 1975. She had been bludgeoned to death. June 1st, Brenda Carol Ball, who was 22, disappeared after leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien and was last seen in the parking lot talking to a man with his arm in a sling. Skull and mandible recovered at Taylor Mountain site in 1975. Her skull had been fractured. June 11th, Jorian Hawkins, abducted from an alley behind her sorority house. Skeletal remains identified by Bundy as those of Hawkins recovered at Isaac site. Isaac? I can't pronounce that. Hawkins remains listed as a missing person. Sorry for butchering a lot of these. July 14th, they got 2 of them. Janice Ann Out, 23, abducted from Lake Samis State Park in broad daylight and was last seen leaving the park with Bundy, who had asked her for assistance with putting his sailboat on his car. Skeletal remains recovered at Isaac site in 1974. Then Denise Marie Naslund, who was 19, abducted 4 hours after Ott from the same park and was last seen walking towards the restroom. Skeletal remains also recovered at Isaac site in 1974. All right, we have Utah. Let me see here. October 2nd, Nancy Wilcox, who was 16, last seen riding in a yellow Volkswagen Beetle near her home in Holiday, Utah. After going out to buy a pack of gum, body buried, according to Bundy, near Capitol Reef National Park, 200 miles south of Salt Lake City, but never found. October 18th, Melissa Ann Smith, 17, vanished from Midvale, Utah, after leaving a pizza parlor to walk back to her home. Body found 9 days later on a hillside in Summit Park, Utah. Her head had been severely beaten with a crowbar, and her body had been battered before death. October 31st, Halloween, Laura Ann Aim, 17, disappeared from Lehigh, Utah on her way home from a Halloween party. Body discovered by hikers in American Fork Canyon. Her face was beaten beyond recognition, and she had been strangled and sexually assaulted. November 8th, Carol Danrox, who was 18, picked up from the Fashion Place shopping mall in Murray, lured by Bundy's guise of claiming to be a police officer investigating vehicle break-ins in the parking lot. She escaped by jumping out of Bundy's vehicle after he inadvertently fastened a pair of handcuffs on the same wrist. November 8th, Deborah Jean Kent, 17, vanished after leaving a school play in Bountiful, Utah. Body left according to Bundy near Fairview, 100 miles south of Bountiful. One patella was found, which was positively identified by DNA as Kent's in 2015. Holy fucking time labor. 1975. Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. January 12th, Karen Eileen Campbell, 23, disappeared from a hotel hallway in Snowmass, Colorado. Body discovered on a dirt road near the hotel with skull fractures and knife wounds on February 17th. March 15th, Julie Lyle Cunningham, 26, disappeared from Valley, Colorado after she left her apartment in the Palo Park neighborhood to visit a local tavern. Her body was buried, according to Bundy, near Rifle, 90 miles west of Vail, but also never found. April 6, Denise Lynn Oliverson, 24, abducted while cycling to her parents' house in Grand Junction, Colorado. Body thrown, according to Bundy, into the Colorado River 5 miles west of Grand Junction, but never found. May 6, you got Lynette Dawn Culver, 12, abducted from Pocatello, Idaho, after she left Alameda Junior High School for her lunch break. Body thrown, according to Bundy, into what authorities believe to be the Snake River, but never found. June 28th, Susan Curtis, 15, disappeared during a youth conference at Brigham Young University when she left her friends to walk back to her dormitory and brush her teeth. Body buried according to Bundy along a highway near Price, 75 miles south of Provo, but never found. 1978, January 15th, Margaret Elizabeth Bauman, 21, bludgeoned and strangled as she slept at the Chi Omega sorority at Florida State University. A lot of these are January. Actually, the next few are January 15th. Lisa Janet Levy, 20, bludgeoned, strangled, bitten, and sexually assaulted as she slept at the Chi Omega sorority at Florida State University. Karen Chandler, 21, bludgeoned as she slept at the Chi Omega sorority, survived, although her skull was fractured and her jaw, right arm, and fingers were crushed. Kathy Kleiner, 21, bludgeoned as she slept at the Chi Omega sorority, resulting in her jaw being shattered and her right cheek being ripped open, survived. Lastly, for January 15th, Cheryl Thomas, 21, bludgeoned as she slept 8 blocks from Chi Omega, survived after having a fractured jaw and a skull, which left her with permanent deafness in her left ear and an equilibrium damage. February 9th, Kimberly Diane Leach, 12, abducted from Lake City Junior High School in Lake City, Florida, and was last seen being led to a white van by a man who was later identified as Bundy. Mummified remains found near Saween River State Park, 43 miles west of Lake City, with homicidal violence about the neck region. Unconfirmed ones now. We have Bundy remains a suspect in several unsolved homicides and disappearances, as is likely responsible for others that may have never be identified. In 1987, he confided to Keppel that there were some murders that he would never talk about because they were committed too close to home, too close to family, or involved victims who were very young. Minutes before his execution, Hagmeyer acquired Bundy about unsolved homicides in New Jersey, Vermont, Illinois, Texas, and Florida. Bundy provided directions, later proven inaccurate, to Curtis's burial site in Utah, but denied involvement in any of the open cases. In 2011, Bundy's complete DNA profile obtained from a vial of his blood found in an evidence vault was added to the FBI's DNA database and future reference in these and other unsolved murder cases. Anne Marie Burr, age 8, vanished from her Tacoma home on August 31, 1961, when Bundy was 14. An unknown tennis shoe imprint was found by the overturned bench used to enter her house. Due to the small size of the shoe, police believed the perpetrator was a teenager or youth. The Burr house was on Bundy's newspaper delivery route, and Burr's father was certain that he saw Bundy in a ditch at a construction site on the nearby UPS campus the morning his daughter disappeared. Other circumstantial evidence implicates Bundy as well, but detectives familiar with the case have never agreed on the likelihood of his involvement. Bundy repeatedly denied culpability and wrote a letter of denial to the Burr family in 1986. However, Keppel was observed that Burr case fits all three categories of murders Bundy would never talk about: too close to home, too close to family, and very young. Forensic testing of material evidence from the Burr crime scene in 2011 yielded insufficient intact DNA sequences for comparison with Bundy's, and as such his involvement remains speculative. There's a lot of this crap. Holy shit, Bundy was a monster. Flight attendants Lisa Wick and Lonnie Ree Trumbull, both 20, were bludgeoned with a piece of lumber as they slept in their basement apartment in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood in the early mornings of June 23, 1966. An autopsy concluded that Trumbull had died at approximately midnight from a blow to the head she had received about an hour earlier. In retrospect, Keppel noted many similarities to the Chi Omega crime scene. The crime was also similarly comparable to Bundy's earlier verifiable assaults on women who were bludgeoned while in their beds in Seattle basement apartments. Wick, who suffered permanent memory loss as a result of the attack, later contacted Rule. "I know that it was Ted Bundy who did that to us," she wrote, "but I can't tell you how I know." Police records state that when Bundy's fingerprints were compared in January 1977 to those left at the crime scene, they did not match. Although many people were allowed into the unsecured crime scene and may have left fingerprints, thereby causing unwanted alteration of evidence, Bundy's involvement remains unconfirmed. Vacationing in Pennsylvania college friends Susan Margaret Davis and Elizabeth Potter Perry, both 19, were stabbed to death in Somers Point, New Jersey. The women who had been visiting Ocean City were on their way back to Pennsylvania in about 4:30 a.m. on May 30, 1969, before they stopped at the Somers Point Diner for breakfast. They left the diner 1 hour later and vanished. Their car was found that day abandoned beside the Garden State Parkway outside Somers Point near Atlantic City, 60 miles southeast of Philadelphia, and their bodies were discovered in nearby woods 3 days later, tied to the trees with their hair. Davis was naked with her clothing and accessories in a pile beside her, except for her missing underwear. Perry was fully dressed. Bundy attended Temple University from January through May 1969 and apparently did not move west until after Memorial Day weekend. While his accounts of his earliest crimes varied considerably between interviews, he told forensic psychologist Art Norman that his first murder victims were two women in the Philadelphia area. Biographer Richard Larson believed that Bundy committed the murders using his fiend injury ruse based on the investigator's interview with Julia Cowell, Bundy's aunt. Ted, she said, was wearing a leg cast due to an automobile accident on the weekend of the homicides, and therefore could not have traveled from Philadelphia to the Jersey Shore. There is no official record of any such accident. Bundy is considered a strong suspect, but the case remains open. Rita Patricia Curran, a 24-year-old elementary school teacher and part-time motel maid, was murdered in her basement apartment on July 19, 1971, in Burlington, Vermont. She had been strangled, bludgeoned, and raped. The time of death was later given as approximately midnight. The location of the motel where she worked, which was adjacent to Bundy's birthplace, the Elizabeth Lund home for unwed mothers, and similarities to known Bundy crime scenes led retired FBI agent John Bassett to propose him as a suspect. Bundy told Keppel that he murdered a young woman in 1971 in Burlington when he was there to obtain information about his birth, but denied specific involvement in the current case to Hagmaier on the eve of his execution. No evidence firmly places Bundy in Burlington on that date, but municipal records note that a person named Bundy was bitten by a dog that week, and long stretches of Bundy's time, including the summer of 1971, remain unaccounted for. In 2023, the Burlington Police Department announced that Curran's killer was her next-door neighbor who had been identified using DNA extracted from a discarded cigarette butt found at the crime scene. Holy time frame later. Just last year. Joyce Margaret LePage, 21, was last seen on the evening of July 22nd, 1971, when friends dropped her off at her apartment on the campus of Washington State University, where she was an undergraduate. Later, her vehicle would be discovered by police parked 4 blocks from her residence. 9 months later, her skeletal remains were found wrapped in 2 military blankets bound with rope in a deep ravine south of Pullman, Washington. Her remains were also covered with a sizable piece of green shag carpet that had been previously reported missing from Stevens Hall, a woman's residence on the WSU campus, which was vacant and undergoing renovations in the summer of 1971. The cause of her death was confirmed to be 3 knife wounds to her chest, which was determined during an FBI forensic examination of her bones. Police concluded from the available evidence that she had been stabbed to death in Stevens Hall before being wrapped in carpet and taken to the ravine. Whitman County authorities have said that multiple suspects, including Bundy, have never been cleared. Carrie Mae Hardy, 22, disappeared while hitchhiking on June 13, 1972, from Woodland Park, Seattle. Hardy's skeletal remains were unearthed on September 6, 2010, by construction machinery in a grave measuring 2 feet in depth. DNA from the skeleton matched the family sample on June 1st, 2011. Hardy's body was discovered 5 miles from Bundy's mass grave at Taylor Mountain, and she is known to have shared a mutual acquaintance with Bundy. Although it is uncertain if they actually knew each other, the case remains officially unsolved. In 1989, Bundy confessed to 2 homicides in Oregon without identifying the victims. Oregon law enforcement subsequently identified Bundy as a prime suspect in the 1973 disappearance of Vicki Lynn Holler, 24, who disappeared from Eugene on August 20th, and Suzanne Ray Justice, 23, who was last seen in Portland on November 5th. Holler was last seen getting into her car at a parking lot en route to her apartment. Justice was last heard from when she telephoned her parents from outside the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Bundy was linked to the cases due to the fact that Holler and Justice both fitted his preferred victim profile and was known to have been in the area at the time of their disappearance. Another possible victim that was identified by the detectives was 17-year-old Rita Lorraine Jolly, who disappeared from West Lynn on June 29, 1973. After leaving her residence on Horton Road to go for a walk, Jolly was the last seen between 8:30 and 9 p.m. walking uphill on Sunset Avenue. Authorities were unable to obtain an interview with Bundy, and all 3 women remain classified as missing. Catherine Mary Devine, 14, was abducted on November 25, 1973, and her body was found the next month in the Capitol State Forest near Olympia, Washington. Brenda Jo Baker, 14, was last seen hitchhiking near Puyallup on May 27, 1974. Her body was found in Millersvania State Park a month later. Her throat had been slit. Though Bundy was widely believed responsible for both murders, he told Keppel that he had no knowledge of either case. DNA analysis led to the arrest and conviction of William Costin for Devine's murder in 2002. The Baker homicide remains unsolved, although Costin is also considered the prime suspect in her case. Sandra Jean Weaver, 19, a Wisconsin native who had been living in Tule, who was last seen leaving the warehouse district in Salt Lake City for her lunch break at around 10:30 a.m. on July 1, 1974. Her nude body was discovered the following day by tourists hiking in Dubuque by the Colorado River near Grand Junction, Colorado. She had been sexually assaulted and died by suffocation due to strangulation before being dumped off a service road. Salt Lake County Sheriff's Detective Jerry Thompson later stated that Weaver's case was very similar to the subsequent death of Smith and Ames. However, Weaver's murder was officially remains unsolved. 21-year-old University of Utah student Rhonda Stapley was waiting at a bus stop in Salt Lake City on October 11, 1974, when she was allegedly approached by Bundy, who had pulled over and offered her a ride in his Volkswagen Beetle. After entering his vehicle, Bundy drove to an isolated canyon picnic spot, shot off the engine, turned to her, and said, "Do you know what? I'm going to kill you now." Okay. He then repeatedly choked and raped Stapley over a period of 3 hours until Bundy, who thought she was dead, was distracted by something near his car and she was able to run into the woods. Although she would not publicly acknowledge the incident until 2011, her account was supported by Ann Rule, who was that it was consistent with FBI's timeline of Bundy's activities in 1974. Melanie Suzanne Cooley, 18, disappeared on April 15, 1975, after leaving Nederland High School in Nederland, 50 miles northwest of Denver. She was last seen by classmates hitchhiking nearby after her classes were over. Her corpse was discovered by road maintenance workers 2 weeks later in Coal Creek Canyon, 20 miles away from where she was last seen. Gas station receipts placed Bundy in nearby Golden on that day. Cooley disappeared. Jefferson County authorities considered the evidence in Cooley's case to be inconclusive and continued to treat her homicide as a cold case. Shelley K. Robertson, 24, failed to show up to work in Golden, Colorado on July 1st, 1975. Her nude, decomposed body was found by two mining students on August 21st, 500 feet inside a mine on Berthound Pass near Winter Park Resort. Credit card receipts placed Bundy in Golden on the day of Robertson's disappearance, but there's no direct evidence of the involvement. Nancy Perry Baird, 23, disappeared from the gas station where she worked as a service station attendant in Layton, 25 miles north of Salt Lake City on July 4, 1975, and remains classified as a missing person. A police officer on patrol saw her working alone there, and at 5:30 p.m., less than 15 minutes later, she was discovered missing. Bundy admitted to 8 Utah homicides shortly before his execution, and authorities suspected that one of the unidentified victims could have been Baird. However, her suspected kidnapping did not fit the profile of Bundy's past crimes in a number of respects, and he explicitly denied involvement during the interviews he gave from his death row cell. Deborah Diane Smith, 17, was last seen in Salt Lake City in early February 1976, shortly before the DaRanch trial began. Her body was found by a Utah power and light worker checking on poles in an open pasture near the Salt Lake City International Airport on April 1, 1976. Salt Lake detective Jim Bell suspected that Bundy may have killed Smith. We're still in limbo on the Debbie Smith one, Bell said. We're going to wait for a time chart. We haven't come up with anything on Bundy, but we haven't ruled anything out either. Lastly, Joy Kathleen Harmon, 22, was last seen exiting the Better Days bar in Salt Lake City on the evening of March 2, 1976. On March 6, a hiker between Parley's Canyon and Immigration Canyon, found her partially clothed body north of Interstate 80. Harmon had been strangled and beaten. Her murder occurred the day after Bundy was found guilty of aggravated kidnapping and 3 months before he was sentenced to prison and incarcerated on June 30th. Her case is still unsolved. Ted Bundy is one sick son of a bitch. The fact that he has admitted to a lot of these, or the fact that they had to make a lot of them unsolved because it didn't relate to his previous crimes. Ted Bundy has been the main story in a lot of different media, ranging from books to movies to music and even television and podcasts, obviously. The most recent of his portrayal is in the movie No Man of God from 2021, played by Luke Kirby. Give it a check out. I've not seen it, but it'd probably be pretty interesting. But that was all for today. He was executed. So they were, I believe, in 1989. So that's it for that. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of A Reason to Talk with Chris Reason. Check out our online store at ebay.com/str/ChrisReasonNetwork to help support the podcast and the channel. Hit that follow button for all podcast needs to stay up to date, or for all podcast needs to stay up to date when we release new episodes. If you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell, then select all to stay up to date for when new episodes air and other great content. Peace, bacon grease, guys. See you later. This is A Reason to Talk.